Lieutenant Edgerly, a previous officer of the 7th Cavalry serving with Benteen's battalion, which united with Reno's force some 15 or 20 minutes after Reno's retreat, wrote a letter in 1881, 5 years after Custer's defeat, at Little Bighorn in 1876. At about 10 o'clock on the morning of June 25, 1876, we were some 15 miles distant from the hostile camp. Our complete command had gathered at that location. We halted while Custer, together with Crow and Ree scouts, climbed a ridge to survey the Indian village, which was in view. When General Custer came down from the ridge, officer's call was sounded. The officers congregated around him, and he told us that our detachment had been discovered. His scouts had chased a minor party of Indians they had seen, but the Indians got away and proceeded toward the Indian camp. As there was no possibility of attempting a surprise assault, which he had first intended for the following day, we would instead move forward quickly and, if feasible, fight them in the village. The idea was that the Indians could not resist an entire cavalry regiment, and upon hearing of our advance, they would probably try to escape. He then instructed troop commanders to mount their men and report readiness to advance. Within a minute, each troop commander had reported. General Custer and his adjutant, Colonel Cook, Lieutenant W. W. Cook, then divided the regiment into 4 battalions, each made up of 3 troops. They gave command of each battalion to one of the 4 senior officers, Reno, Benteen, Keogh, and Yates. Major Reno was directed to advance straight down the valley toward the Indian village and begin an attack, with support to be given. Colonel Benteen was commanded to turn left at an angle of about 45 degrees from Reno's course and attack any Indians he met. The anticipation was that the Indians would run either to the right or left. Captain McDougall, with his troop, was appointed as rear guard to protect the pack train. The precise orders given to Colonel Keogh and Captain Yates were not known, but General Custer went with them along with 5 companies, totaling about 250 to 300 men, advancing in a direction parallel to Reno's. The final occasion I saw General Custer alive, he was moving off in the stated direction. Colonel Benteen followed the orders and soon came upon a chain of high bluffs. He sent an officer, Lieutenant Gibson, to the tops of several bluffs to look for any signs of Indians along their path. Lieutenant Gibson returned repeatedly to report that no signs of Indians were in view. After that, Colonel Benteen turned to the right, and after roughly 5 or 6 miles, we met Reno's trail, which we immediately followed. After following it for several miles, an orderly trumpeter sent from General Custer arrived and gave Colonel Benteen a message, reading, "We have found a big village. Move quickly. Bring the packs." We continued on, and when we were some 3 miles from the Indian village, we saw evidence of fighting in the valley. Soon after, we observed a party of men, more than 100 in number, running toward the bluffs on the east side of the Little Bighorn River. This river ran on the west side of the Indian village. The men crossed the stream and disappeared into the bluffs. At that time, we were located on the right bank, east of the stream, and a good distance from it. Since the orderly who brought the message from Custer had told us that the Indian village had been taken by surprise and that Reno was driving the Indians before him while attacking them vigorously, I supposed that the men we saw running were Indians being chased by our men. We hurried toward the ford where Reno had crossed, meaning to rush to his assistance. However, as we approached the ford, a Crow scout named Half Yellowface appeared on our right and signaled for us to join him on the bluff. Without hesitation, we turned to the right and climbed the bluff. Upon gaining the top, we found Colonel Reno and his battalion, along with several wounded men in urgent need of water. To our astonishment, we learned that they had been compelled to withdraw from their place. There were a few Indians hiding behind rocks and hillsides, shooting at us. A skirmish line was rapidly formed, and these Indians were driven off within minutes. Soon I heard heavy gunfire coming from the direction where we later found the remains of Custer's command. I could also see clouds of dust and horsemen moving back and forth on the far side of the river, about 4 miles away. During this gunfire, Colonel Weir, my captain, came to me and asked about our plan of action. I answered that I thought it essential for us to hurry to Custer's assistance immediately. He agreed with my opinion, and I heard the first sergeant voicing the same view. He then asked if I would be willing to go with him with only D Troop, if he could get permission. I said I would. After that, he went to Colonel Reno and Benteen, and upon returning a short time later, he mounted his horse, along with an orderly, and rode toward the direction from which the gunfire had come, which by then had mostly stopped. I assumed that he had received approval to proceed with the troop, though he later told me that he had not, and had not even asked for it, so I mounted the troop and followed him. After advancing a few hundred yards, I turned to the right with the troop and entered a small valley, probably the same one used by Custer and his men, or a route nearly parallel to it. We went directly toward the large party of Indians, whom we had already seen from a higher position. While we were moving down the valley, Colonel Weir, who had been on the bluff to our left, saw a large group of Indians coming toward us. He signaled for me to redirect the troop toward his location, which I did at once. Upon reaching the bluff, I saw Colonel Benteen, Captain French, and Lieutenant Godfrey approaching with their troops. We moved along the bluff for a short distance when the Indians began shooting at us. The troops dismounted, formed a line on the summit, and fired back. The shooting continued for about 30 minutes until General Reno ordered the troops to fall back to their original position. During our withdrawal, one of our men was killed, and we lost just one horse, despite a couple of Indians firing at us as we left. Upon rejoining Reno's position, we found the other troops arranged along the crest of the hill. Weir's troop and Godfrey's troop aligned side by side to lengthen the existing line formed by our troops. Soon after we took this position, the Indians advanced toward us and began firing. Although the firing was heavy, only a few men were killed as most of the shots went over our heads. The exchange lasted for more than an hour and continued until 30 minutes after dark, marking the end of the day's fighting. The next morning, just before dawn, heavy gunfire broke out again from the hills about 500 to 800 yards away from us. This persisted until about 10 o'clock. After that, the firing decreased considerably, though we could still see small parties of Indians on the ridges around us. In the afternoon, the Indians on the other side of the river took down their lodges or teepees, and around 4 o'clock they all left. Since we had occupied our position the previous afternoon, we sustained very few casualties. We stayed in that place or moved to a nearby position overnight, and the next morning Lieutenant Bradley from General Terry's column, who commanded the scouts, arrived and told us that Custer and his entire command had been killed. Soon after, General Terry arrived with his column. He then sent our regiment to bury the dead. Along with enlisted men from L Troop, Lieutenants Calhoun and Crittenden were the first dead troops we encountered. Their men's bodies lay in a regular skirmish line, and the bodies of these officers lay right behind their troops, where they belonged. Crittenden's body had many arrow wounds. Moving on, we came upon Colonel Keogh and his troop. They seemed to have been retreating toward the knoll where Colonel Custer's body was found, fighting as they withdrew. The other men I saw showed no sign of being in a regular formation. Their bodies were scattered over the ground, generally moving toward the knoll where Custer lay. We found the bodies of General Custer, Colonel Cook, Lieutenant W. W. Cook, Colonel Tom Custer, his adjutant, a number of enlisted men, and a number of horses on the aforementioned knoll. We found Lieutenant Riley, Captain Yates, several enlisted soldiers, and horses around the base of the knoll. Boston Custer, General Custer's brother, and Reed, his nephew, were located about 100 yards away from the general's body. The only officers' bodies I saw that had been mutilated were those of Colonel Tom Custer and Colonel Cook, Lieutenant W. W. Cook. All the bodies had been stripped of their clothing. Most of the men were entirely naked, though in several cases they still wore their undershirts, socks, and drawers. The dead lay below the main village on the east bank, about 4 miles from where Reno had taken his position. When I went out with the troop in the afternoon of the 25th, I saw many Indians riding back and forth across the battlefield, where we later found the bodies. They were shooting at objects on the ground, though we could not make out what those objects were. When I first reached the crest of the hill where Reno was posted on the 25th, I could hear the heavy gunfire, which lasted for about 15 or 20 minutes. After that, the gunfire ceased. After burying General Custer and his men on the eastern side of the river, we crossed to the western side and interred the fallen soldiers from Reno's command, about 40 in number. During our search, we found 2 Indian lodges, one containing 6 bodies and the other 5. These individuals were finely dressed and tied to a pole at the center of each teepee. Chief Lodog later said that this was an honorable way of treating those who had died bravely in battle, leaving their bodies for the enemy to take. I have never seen a similar practice anywhere else. In my opinion, the Indians probably left in haste because of the approach of Terry's column, which likely alarmed them. Near the teepees where we found the dead Indians, there were as many dead ponies as there were Indians. Facing the teepee, the horses were placed in a circle around it. From what I saw, I estimate there were about 7,000 warriors present. I made this estimate by comparing it to the size of Terry's command, which was about 500 men, a formation I knew well, as they rode down to the area where I had seen the Indians the day before. Terry's force seemed greatly outnumbered by the Indians. From the accounts given by the Indians, Custer's trail shows that he traveled along the river, which was only about 15 or 20 yards wide at that point, on the east side or the right bank. In contrast, Reno had crossed the river and launched his attack from the west. The riverbank was steep and high, making it hard to descend from the bluff until reaching a spot a little over 3 miles from where Reno established his position after retreating across the river. At that place, Custer found a ford, and it was generally believed that he tried to cross but was opposed and driven back to where his body was found. Along the route from the ford to where Custer's body was found, dead bodies were scattered. Before starting the march, Custer, who usually wore his hair long, had it cut short. Though his body was naked, it bore no signs of mutilation.